Welcome to Teamwork Fencing. Today we're going to be installing a D5 smart motor for a sliding gate system. So when you go to our website, you're going to need to order the kit. In the kit, you'll get your D5 smart motor, which is this over here. That includes all the pieces you'll need for that motor. Now in that kit too, you'll also have some racking. It comes with 4 of these 1 meter racking pieces that you'll bolt into the sliding gate itself. And then it will come with 2 batteries. Now the batteries get installed into the motor, very simple, and we'll run through that at a later stage. Now you will need some extra bits and pieces when you're installing this. Obviously you want a drill, you want an impact driver, you're going to need some hex head tech bits to drill in the racking. You'll need some masonry bits to be able to bolt down your motor. You'll need a marker, of course, some mechanical galvanized bolts, and then you'll also need one of these bad boys. And for safety, just make sure you're wearing some earmuffs whenever you're drilling or using any heavy machinery, and also your safety glasses. Alright, so we're going to unbox the motor. I'll do my best to explain to you every single piece of equipment that we have in it. So when we open it up, what you should find inside is bolts, washers, extra little bits for bolting down the motor pad itself. You'll get 2 remotes. You also get a couple of keys for it. These are additional bolts that you'll need and required for the bolt down pad, which we'll explain later too. So when you lift that up, what you'll find inside is your D5 CENTSYS smart motor. All right. Now they're pretty sturdy, pretty strong, so you can just lift it out of the box with the gears on the back. We'll open this up as we're installing it, explain the extra details inside. So you have that. And then what we have, the last bit that we have, your bolt down pad, which in the first step is what we're going to show you how to install. Okay, so we're going to fast track this process. We've already built the beautiful sliding gate system with its guide post, and now what we're going to do is we're going to bolt down this pad for the motor. So in order to do that, you also need a concrete pad against the sliding gate for us to drill and bolt this too, so it's strong enough and steady enough to hold the sliding gate as it slides back and forth. So what I've done here is I've put a front and a tail section to this. The front section has this little curve in it, right? And that should be towards the open section of the sliding gate, and the tail should be towards the tail of the sliding gate. So we're going to place that onto the concrete pad here. And as you can see, there's 3 marks here in the front and there's 3 marks here at the back, right? 3 holes, I should say. So when we're setting the base plate, we want to make sure we set it at least 50 mils off the guide post to allow space for the motor to sit down. And on this case, we've had the footing made a little bit too wide. So the base plate has to sit a little bit far away from the sliding gate. So we're going to have to use spacers when we put down the racking for this one. But what we'll do now is we're going to mark the holes that we believe are going to come down into the concrete footing to hold the base plate onto the footing. What we're going to do then is we're going to drill down and we're going to set some bolts into the ground to hold this base plate down. So in the bottom of the box, as we spoke before, you'll have your bolt down track and you'll have your motor. Now it's really important to not make the mistake of drilling the wrong holes into your concrete base. So the way to double check which way and how we're going to drill into the concrete base is we have our trusty motor here. We're going to pull the lid off after unlocking it with the key. And in here, you're going to have 2 clips, right? We're going to clip these to loosen it, and then we're going to pull this out. Now it might be a little tricky to pull out. You always want to make sure that this front section is pulled out like that, and that unlocks this section in here. So then you should be able to slide this out, right? And in here you'll be able to see little holes at the bottom. So what you want is you want the gears to be positioned towards the sliding gate, and you want the holes be positioned on top of your base plate. Now, the holes that you can see in the base plate, those are the ones that need to go up. The ones that you can't see are the ones that get bolted to the concrete footing. All right, so we're just gonna have one more look at the base plate so we understand what's going on before we bolt everything down. So as you can see here, we have 3 dyno bolts. They're hot tip galvanized, so they're all weather and they won't rust out. So we're gonna end up hammering those back into the concrete and then bolting them in. Then you've obviously got your 3 bolts coming up out of the base plate. Now, in them, you've been given some bolts, right? And you can screw them on, and then you'll have 3 of these funny gadgets in the motor box. They sit over the top of your bolted down bolts going upwards to allow for the motor to sit on something that is soft and holds the motor in place. So then in order, what we're gonna do is we're now gonna screw the motor on into place. First, you're gonna put down one of these, then one of those, and a nut on top, right? And that's gonna tighten down and hold the motor in place. So that first, this little guy, and then your nut on top. So it can be pretty tricky to tighten the nuts and bolts. So we've got a ratchet here, and what you do is on the motor, if you come in closer, there's a little clip here. You can lift the section of the motor, and then you can get your tools in and tighten everything as needed. Now, it's not always going to be sitting perfectly in place. Sometimes you'll need spacers in order to make sure that the motor is tightened down level and ready for the racking to be put onto the motor. So just be aware of this when you're tightening it, to use a level to make sure everything's tight and fast, but you've used spacers to level everything out. Okay, now that your motor is sturdy and in place, there's a couple things we need to check first, right? We're now gonna put the racking in, but we wanna make sure that the racking itself can actually move fluidly with the sliding gate before we start tech screwing it onto the sliding gate. So we're gonna take this and we're gonna put this onto the gear at the back here. At this particular point, if you have the motor in an open position, which you should have, the actual gear itself should be able to move with the racking. Okay, so if we come back around to the racking, what we want to see is that this racking actually moves along the gears without catching on anything, and it moves quite nicely. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to start tech screwing the racking on to the sliding gate. Now I'm going to keep moving it forward and keep tech screwing it on, adding more racking until we're done. Okay, so I've set my first racking. I'm going to explain to you how I've done it, but there are a few different ways you can do this. The key goal is that you want the racking to sit firmly and nicely on the actual gears, so that when the gear is moving, it's holding onto the racking, it's pulling the sliding gate back and forth. So you never want that racking to sit higher off the gearbox so it slips. You don't want that. So what I do when I'm setting my first one is I sit the racking about halfway through the gears, and then I level out this racking. And then what I do is there's a bit of space when you can tech this in. You tech it somewhere in the middle of the spacing. So this side is firmly holding onto the sliding gate. And what I do then is I move my racking to the end of its actual piece of meter rack. Make sure the gearbox is firmly attached to the racking. Slide it back a tiny bit, and then I tech in that final spot over there. That means that my first piece of racking is solidly tightened onto the sliding gate, and I can come through at a later stage and tech screw the rest of the racking sections to the sliding gate. But what that means now is that when I go to add my second piece of racking, we can clip that in quite nicely. Slides in, okay. And now what I can do is, I know that this section, because I've pushed that as far down to the gearbox as I can, I know that this section is most likely correct for me to tech screw. So I'll tech that in, and then I'll slide this along the gears until I get to the end and allow gravity to hold that racking down, and I'll tech that section in. And I'll keep doing that along the sliding gate until all my racking's in, and then I'll come through at the end and I'll add any additional tech screws where there's missing sections. So as with all things in fencing, we face a lot of problems. And today, the problem that we're facing is that as we go to close the sliding gate, right, we have not completely closed the sliding gate, and we don't have enough space on the end here to add a whole piece of racking. So as you can see, we only need a small section, which is probably about 25 centimeters. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut the racking, and we're gonna use a small section of it. Most likely you'll also have to face this problem. When you do, you just use a grinder. This is plastic with a steel frame in the inside. So you get through the plastic and then you just gotta cut through the steel. Once you've done that, you can tack that through onto the sliding gate. So the next step is we need to power the motor. Now there's two ways to do that. One is if you're an electrician or you have someone who is an electrician, they can hardwire it right into the motor. If you're not an electrician, I would suggest that you either get an electrician to run a GPO, ideally isolated from the rest of the house, so you can switch it on, switch it off, and work directly with this without affecting the house. But what you do is then we can take one of these that you can get from your local hardware store, and we can wire this into the motor and plug it into the GPO and run all the testing we need to get the motor up and going. So to do that, once you've bolted down this motor, there is an ability for you to put your fingers and hands underneath here, and there is a hole through the middle here, and you can just thread this through that hole. A pair of pliers or something like that will work too. Okay, as you can see, that's up. Now what I'm gonna do is we're gonna put this back in, this section of the body. And as you can see there, we've been able to pull it through as such. So to make things quick for you, we've already done it, but I'm gonna show you what we have done. We've had to ground the motor. So in order to do that, you grab this section of the motor that comes apart. Attached to it will be a grounding line. That grounding line needs to be put on before you put the nut around this section here. Can you see in there? If you have a look, now the grounding line is attached to this nut in the front. So what I'll do is I'm going to quickly tighten that up. Okay, now that's tight. And what we can do now is we can slide this on with the grounding set up. And hopefully what you can do is get the cord to sit nicely on the edge here. And then with a power line, right, we've run a suicide line through underneath here, up there, and we've tightened it onto its plug. Now, making sure you use the live, neutral, and earth, plug it into its correct corresponding colors, clip it in with a little cap over the top. And that way now you're earth and you have a line of power. So there's a few things we now need to plug in. We have two separate wiring here. First of all, this wiring. We have to do it in this order that we don't trip the battery, trip the motor. So this has to happen in sequence to make it easier as we're installing the software. So firstly, this section, right, we plug in where there's 4 lines coming out of this plug into the bottom of this motor here. Secondly, we plug in this section of the wiring. So if you come in there, you'll be able to see that it's right next to the blue plug. You put this tiny two-piece plug here, and then in here, this plug goes in here. Just to double check while you're doing this, sorry, wrong way. Make sure that the red power point is on the left and the black is on the right. All right, make sure they're nicely firmly in. Now the next thing we're gonna do is plug in the power for both the batteries. So we have 2 batteries. I've already put one in. I'm gonna show you the other one now that what we're gonna do is we're gonna put it in here. Oh. Wonderful. Clip that back in. Make sure that this is clipped in properly. Should hear it clip in. Now you're going to pull these little yellow sleeves off the power source. And on each of the batteries, you should be able to see the red and the black color points. Plug in this section through here. And now what we're going to do is nicely and neatly line that through this section. And we're going to put in red onto red. Black onto black. And same on this side here. Red onto red. And black onto black. And you should hear the motor now have power. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to switch on the power cord to run power to the batteries and to the motor. You have to have the power on with a strong source of power when we're programming the motor, because the output of power is really high during the installation mode. If you do this without power plugged in, just running off the battery, you'll short the motor. So make sure that that's on before you do the work. Okay, so now that you have put the racking on, you know that the motor is attached securely, the gearbox is running along the racking, you've made sure that you have end stops on either end, ways for the sliding gate to close up again. So we've got an end stop on that end over there, and we have the end stop, which is the post on the other side. All of that's done. We can now say that the motor is installed correctly, the power is on. What we're going to do is we're going to put the lid back on the motor, okay? And we're going to close this, right? And lock it up. Now I'm going to leave the keys in there because we're going to need to use this now to access the motor through Bluetooth now that we've downloaded the application. So now we'll go back to the application and look at our phone for further details.